On a planet called Origin, some life is really weird. Most people classify life by 12 magical elements, but the element of Null stands out. The simplest classification of life into two groups would leave you with life as we know it and life as we don't. I'll talk in depth about the latter in this video, all of whom are Null elementals we call the Origin. A lot of stuff is called Origin. The planet, the sun, the sea, the sky, the god, the mountains, the lake. Life as we don't know it is basically synonymous with Null Elemental or Origin, but it's so long. To avoid confusion, I'll call them LAWD, or LOD. Just an acronym for Life as we don't. Makes it easier for everyone, I promise. As the story goes, the LOD are descended from the original residents of this fine planet. Billions of years ago, there was an elaborate society of people from whom a character called the Allfather was born. The Allfather, life incarnate, Origin themselves. There was an awful catastrophe that wiped them out, leaving just the Allfather. They bathed in the heart-shaped lake of Origin, and life began from the microbes on their body. The Allfather gave their eyes so that we could see, and now they see everything through us. But the LOD aren't descended from those microbes. No, it can't be that simple. What I'm about to say is supported by some archaeological evidence, so it's not all just crazy talk. These original residents divided themselves into 4 groups: those who trained their spirit, those who trained their body, those who trained their mind, and those who trained their soul. I'll define these groups as I go on. Let's start with spirit. There might not be much evidence for this one specifically, but hear me out, okay? No one has any better ideas where this monster comes from anyway. So, spirit magic is a weird kind of magic that only some humans can do. They use it to merge their life energy with another life form in a complicated process I'll talk more about someday. That's the most common use at least, but there's also a weirder one where they infuse their life energy into something else, usually an inanimate object. Basically, your spirit is your life energy. Okay, hear me out because this is where it gets a little wacky. This is a LOD called the Anamano. It creeps around and chokes out larger animals, usually by lodging itself in their throat. Once they die, the Anamano eats them from the inside out with its gross sucker mouth. Once it's had its fill, it spurts out a bunch of spores that go airborne. Once even one spore gets inhaled by a humanoid, and only a humanoid, it moves into one of their arms through the bloodstream. It's already too late at this point. It grows onto the skin of your arm, but it's deeper, it's in your nervous system. Any damage you try to do to it will just be damage to you, and it'll heal up quickly. Even if you cut off your arm, it'll appear on your other arm. It'll be a month of insatiable hunger before the parasite is big enough to separate from you in the most painful event of most people's lives. Well, the second most painful event because it happens twice. It happens to every humanoid in its habitat, and it's almost a coming-of-age thing to them. Once your arm is big enough, it's growing. Who knows how long it's been in your system. It leaves an awful scar on your arm, but at least it can't parasitize you again once both your arms are scarred. This is a real thing that lives on this planet. That's not even the crazy part. Or, well, it used to live on this planet. As recently as 2 years ago, there were a few alive in captivity, but climate change turned where they live, the icy desert of Noir, into the uncomfortably lukewarm beach of Noir, and killed basically everything that was adapted to live there. Thanks, climate change, you did something good for once. Anyway, my best guess is that they came from the original residents. There's evidence that they looked a lot like humans, so maybe they could do spirit magic too. Maybe they trained in that, and some of them put their life energy into the hands of corpses, and that's how this menace came to be. Listen, you tell me how you think this thing evolved. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, but here's how we know the original residents at least trained in something, and that it was specifically 4 things. You might be thinking, what in Origin's name is this? And you'd be right. What is this indeed? I can tell you where it is though. It's deep in the Tombstone Desert. In the tail of it, there's this thing, and it's absolutely huge. Someone managed to go inside it a few years ago. They didn't make it out, but they managed to get their self-service working, and livestreamed the whole thing. It was crazy. Anyway, they found these bones before they got zoinked by Origin knows what. They look like they were made by someone who doesn't know how bones work. They also found 4 symbols in a particular order everywhere, one of which was by the bones. Second from the top if you're curious. And yeah, one of those symbols was the gosh darn Allfather's eye. How'd whoever building this know about that if they lived billions of years ago? I don't know, but it sure makes me think the Allfather might be real. Anyway, the bones look kinda like a lot we know about. Yeah, life as we don't know it that we know about. Whoever came up with that stupid name was more of a theater kid trying to say something cool than a scientist trying to help people learn. Anyway, there was a horrific lot that lived in our lifetimes that had a huge robust body and short legs, kinda like those bones. How do I know it lived in your lifetimes too? Something tells me you were born before 2089. Why'd it go extinct? Something like Anamano, climate change made its southern occidental climate too hot to bear. It couldn't cool down with those muscles generating heat like they're made to bake cookies. I guess it wasn't smart enough to jump in the water. This lot is called the Puffer. Senor Puffer, if we're being respectful. I mean, it is dead, so that's the least we can do. It had a friendly face, but it wasn't smart enough to register any kind of movement as anything but a threat. It spent its life eating and fighting. It went through kind of a metamorphosis and just had a weird life cycle in general. When an adult lived long enough, it would sit still for a few days and do something that looked like sleep. Then its head would walk off its body like a gosh darn cartoon, and dozens of heads would erupt out of its body as the latter deflates, like a gosh darn car flippin' tune. I know I just said I think the Allfather is real, but they must not have as much power as everyone thinks, cause no one's letting this thing slide. Maybe that's why it's extinct now. Anyway, the larval hellspawn grows long spindly legs until it enters a kind of pupa stage, where its resources go from the big fat tail to a usable body. Yeah, the tail isn't fluffy, it's fat. Well, maybe it's a bit of both. You might be thinking, surely this thing has bones. Maybe its fossils will help us understand its evolution. No. Remember how it deflates? The only thing holding this 3-meter behemoth up is some freaky null magic, and probably some evolutionary duct tape and pipe cleaners. The biggest clue to Senor Puffer's relation to the bones in the old what is that isn't just its horns and ears, but also the big eye in the middle of its chest. Yeah, that's an eye. It has an eye in the middle of its chest. An eye is in the middle of its chest. There's an eye in the middle of its chest. It doesn't even open, but if you get to the deflated corpse before the Puffer Jr. eat it, yeah they do that, you can cut that part open to see a deflated eye under the skin. Presumably it can see through the skin? Nobody knows because Senor Puffer over here will kill any scientist that gets within a few dozen meters, and they're not even around anymore anyway. You might be thinking, I'm glad this thing went extinct and there's nothing like it around anymore. Well, you're wrong because there's 2 more Lod we know of in the same genus. I'll get this abomination off your screen though. The Elder Puff is a Lod that we can find in the capital M mountains of the Glacian. In my opinion, it's the least horrible of all the null elementals. Though I wouldn't be surprised if there's more to it that we don't know about. Its larval form, the Puff Cube, is relatively easy to find up in those mountains. You get high enough where it's cold and you'll see them lying around. They don't move, no one even knows if they got a metabolism. You might notice they're fire elementals on top of the null, which we know because they're always absorbing heat energy. Even if you put fire under it, the ice doesn't melt. They're virtually indestructible and seem to be an example of some form of immortality. Are they even alive? The only reason we think they are is because we see them in various stages of development, though no one's ever found one that moves. Is the Elder Puff the adult form or the pupa? We don't know how they evolved, but they grow so slowly I don't even know if the Elder Puff could be from the time of the original residents. Another puff species is the Tanacat. No one even knew this was a lot until recently, but yeah, it checks out. They're kept as pets in some places, but once they get old enough they disappear and are never found again. There were always stories of them becoming a horrible monster, and now that we know their Lod, we know they probably do metamorphosize. There's no solid evidence of what it becomes, but a lack of evidence has never stopped me. Stories are told of a beast as tall as a tree that eats passerby in the dead of night and disappears by morning. They call it Yajd. The common spelling works out to Lloyd though, which sounds like some guy's dad's name. Shout out to dads named Lloyd. None of these things have bones, and they didn't leave any other kind of evidence that we know of, so we're left to just speculate on how they evolved. Tanacat seems to depend on people during its larval stage, so maybe it evolved to look like something people like. I guess it worked out well. The reason we think they evolved from people who train their body... Yeah, sorry I put it on your screen again, let me change it back to the bones. The reason we think they evolved from people who trained their body also has to do with a different set of bones, found in a different but similarly... What an origin is that? What is it? All I know is that this thing is. Also, I know where it is, up in the mountains. I mean, you can see them in the picture, so you probably could have guessed that yourself. Inspired by the person who gave their life to give us knowledge, someone else live-streamed their voyage into the thing. They didn't make it far enough to find anything useful, but we saw the same symbols. Someone else bravely went in a few weeks later and managed to find the tomb, though they never saw the last person on the way. This time there was a different symbol by the bones, the third from the top. They must have had a pretty successful civilization if they had two related buildings on opposite sides of the planet. That or these places used to be closer than they are now. Certainly not the craziest theory I've spat out today. These are the bones. They look absolutely horrific. The autocorrect keyboard suggested delicious, sure, absolutely. Freaky. Anyway, I wanted to mention that these bones look kinda humanoid at a glance. There's nothing humanoid about them. Other than the horns and the tail and the eye sockets where eye sockets aren't supposed to be, and the 3 sets of arms, humanoids do not have ear bones, nose bones, or hips that look anything like that. I will note though that it's likely these arms aren't actually from one individual. Based on their sizes, maybe they're juvenile arms, placed there for some odd cultural reason. Anyway, I've got a theory about them too and their relation to another Lord we know of. I've said the word anyway like 10 times in this video so far. I gotta think of better segues. Anyway, something tells me that the big-headed bones were of someone who trained their mind. At the very least, these ones actually do have bones, so we can confirm almost fully that the lot I'm about to talk about evolved from the people those bones came from. We can see the teeth and the jawbones from these monsters getting bigger and bigger, and there's a rib that's at least 1 billion years old that seems to indicate the monster's head was twice the length of the rest of its body. I almost prefer the one that's alive today. This Lod is called the Calvingen. It's a near-legendary monster known all over the planet that lives around the Origins Peak in the Glacian. This one's still around. Though winter in town is as warm as last year's summer, the mountains are as harsh as always. While Calvingen looks like quite the studious fellow, its brain is relatively small. Most of its body is filled with internal organs such as a heart, lungs, and stomach. If there's not too much blizzard in your face, you can see the ribs expanding and contracting as it breathes. There are pearl-like orbs in its eyes, which we know because people have killed them, and it has one true eye under the one on its forehead. The Calvingen might be the single strongest organism alive today, save for the elder gods like Drazi and Gentune, but with enough warriors they're not impossible to take down. I heard the Mendelgard king hunts them like their deer, but I think that's more legend than fact. You might be wondering, sure, maybe we know what they evolved from, but can you tell me how they evolved? No, I can't. You think I know why there's a bunch of giant human-looking heads floating around on the same planet I'm standing on? If you ask me, it's gotta be the Allfather. I mean, I think they're the reason humanoids evolved too. It can't be a coincidence they look so similar. At the very least, I can tell you some surface-level things about the Calvingen's evolution. It's white to blend in with the snow, and it's red, probably to lure travelers, I don't know. Another species of Calvingen is a critter we call the soul cat. Wait, I totally forgot to tell you about the Calvingen larva. They have larvae. For Calvingen colosi, the big one, the larva is called Grut. The adult spits out a dozen of them every few years. They can grow to be just as big, though they're usually about 1 meter tall. You see a lot of dead ones because hunters kill them for sport. Just to say they felled the great Calvingen. I hear they taste pretty decent in a pinch though. A bit charcoaly, but otherwise not bad. And yeah, they can open their mouths super wide. The adults also do that. Here's a clip from a popular documentary called To Catch a Calvingen from 2004. I heard the best they could do at the time was 1 frame per second. Okay, back to soul cats. Soul cats, scientifically known as Calvingen relica, are quite the curious creatures. They're much smarter than any of the lot I've talked about so far, and they seem to be able to communicate. Some people claim to be able to understand them, but I haven't quite figured out the trick yet. They hang around in old ruins, seemingly because they're interested in it. They also have a larval form, it's called SMAP. The interesting thing about the soul cats most people are familiar with is that technically they're soul cat minor, because sure, SMAP can pupate and emerge as this, but some SMAP just decide not to. They keep eating and getting larger as they grow 3 distinct horn-like protrusions on the top of their head. At this point, they're called a smurg, and when their colors get brighter, they pupate and emerge into a soul cat major. While SC minor lives for a few years before losing color and falling, there are 3 specimens of SC major that have been known to science for the last 100 years. All 3 are alive, and one was even witnessed as a smurg, which isn't the only reason we know they exist. While smurg is rare, it's not 3 on the planet rare. It's just that they almost always lose color, which seems to be synonymous with dying in their pupa stage. As you may have noticed by now, soul cats are also psychic elementals. We have much less data on their evolution, but they've been documented and preserved for as long as civilization has existed. So that's all the lot we know about. Yeah, it's not really much, is it? But what can we learn about their ancestors from this? For one, the adults seem suspiciously humanoid. Even the ones that look simpler sorta have a passing resemblance to cats, one of their closest living relatives. Still, they go through metamorphosis and generally don't have a similar body plan to any life that isn't them, so they're definitely their own thing. None of them are actually humanoid elementals either, so it's unlikely that their ancestors were too. Normally, I'd tell you this is all we know about them and that we have no clue what the 4th symbol means. But you seem nice. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. You may have heard hardcore Allfather believers say that Origin themselves visited us in the year 2000. Most people dismiss this as a claim with no evidence, but there's this one picture. It's super faded and beat up, but you can clearly see a figure that looks like the Allfather. They tower over the other figures and seem to be about as huge as those bones in the whatever it was. The thing is, this picture is clearly dated to 2013, so something isn't adding up. It's probably fake, but if we insert some Allfather religion into this mess, some things start to make sense. The Church of Omni is the group of people who really hardcore believe in the Allfather. Personally, I think they're a bunch of nutjobs, but they do sure have a lot of answers for questions I got about the Lod. They divide our being into spirit, body, mind, and soul. Like I said before, spirit is your life energy, body and mind are pretty straightforward, and then soul is your magic. Humanoids seem to have a pretty powerful soul compared to the rest of their being, and it shows in their mana and general magic abilities. What if the 4th symbol represented the original resident soul, and the Allfather is actually a member of that group? Geez, this sounds like an Ancient Aliens episode. That's all I got for this video. Check out my Patreon where you can subscribe for $1 a month to support me and get your name at the end of my videos. Thanks Captain Kobop and Art of Dying. I promise my next Back Evo video will be more normal. It's about pets. Hope to see you there, and thanks for watching.